Hey, y'all. In this episode, we're talking about failure and not just redefining failure as something that you wouldn't avoid, but also redefining it as all the times you just stopped too soon. So if you reflect on all your failures and you think about, oh, it's something that I just gave up on or something I stopped too soon because I didn't think there was a way, then this episode is for you. Come on in, get comfortable, let's talk. Welcome to the Black Doctor Collective podcast. We as Black doctors are in a unique position. We can change our communities, healthcare, and the world. Of course, we start by changing the way we see and value ourselves. I'm your host, Dr. Shanika Horn, pediatrician and physician coach, travel extraordinaire. I am so happy to have you here and listening. So let's get into it. Good morning. It is a happy Thursday. I'm recording this on a Thursday. And I wanted to talk to you guys this week about failures. It's so fascinating because I have a list of all the times I could say I failed. And the thing is, in reflection, I actually had a really hard time trying to think of a story because all the things I've actually marked as failures, I actually kept going on. And so eventually, if you keep going on something, it will become successful. I think about my journey into medicine. I think that's the easiest story to tell when we're thinking about failures because there was a failure at some point along the way, for sure, for most people. I failed organic chemistry, like an actual F of Orgo 2 on my college transcript. The first F I think I'd ever gotten in life. And it was leading into med school, which is super competitive. And so the concept of seeing an F on the transcript, I know for sure that some people got Fs in their transcript and they decided, oh, I'm not cut out for this. And I think if you add in that person that probably was telling you you're not cut out for this. So for me, it was my college counselor who looked at my transcripts after getting that F and was like, girl, ain't nobody taking you. If you combine all those things, I shouldn't have been a doctor, right? Like, if you decided all those things are super important, then I wouldn't have been a doctor. But I've been liking this term self-concept. And to me, I'm defining it as what you think about yourself. Like, what is your self-concept? What do you feel you're good at? What are your strengths? What do you think you're bad at? Like, who do you define yourself as is your self-concept. So I think my self-concept in my 20s was that bump the haters, I'ma do me, it's gonna be good. Like, I always refer to my 20s as a time where I want to refer to that self-concept. Like, early college, 18, 19, 20, I had so much confidence. It's funny now because I talk about confidence from the sense of like you do the thing, and because you're good at it, you develop the sense of confidence. Confidence is an after effect. I have no idea what I did in my teens to build that kind of confidence, but I had it all the way through my 20s. And there were times where I might have gotten discouraged a little, but I know that I had people around me that gave me positivity, like lifted me up and all of those things. But I also think my self-concept was really strong because I received their messages, their words of positivity, their praise, their rerouting, their redirection, and I went forward. Like, it didn't take much except for some maybe words of affirmation to get me back on to my goal track, right? So I failed organic chemistry, like failed, had to retake it in the summertime. I got to medical school at St. George's. My first semester, you take 3 classes: anatomy, biochemistry, and histology. Almost couldn't remember the third one, child. It's been so long. I dust my little brain memories off. And I got to the first exam and like straight up failed biochemistry. So now we're on F number 2. And in that moment, I remember being like, I think I just for a flash, I thought maybe my college counselor was right and that I can't do this, right? Maybe this is too hard. Maybe I don't have what it takes. I remember that. And I cried about it and I called my mom and my mom gave me this whole pep talk. I don't think I can remember what she said, but it was just something along the lines of like, well, just keep trying, like do what you have to do to move forward. And so that's what I did. I did what I had to do to move forward. I also think in that moment, when we talk about failures, I think there's different level of failures. Getting into med school. Listen, I told everybody I was going to med school, child. Okay. I was so hyped when I got the first acceptance. It wasn't even from St. George's, it was from some other school. And I just remember knowing that at that moment, I was definitely going to med school. This was my future. I was telling the world. I was so excited. I had worked really hard. I had overcome this failure of organic chem. I had taken my MCAT twice. I had all of this like propulsion of like, yes, everything I did, it was worth it. I didn't know it was the beginning of the journey, y'all. But at that time, it felt so good. Like I left my job. I was working at the university where I went to undergrad and did my MPH. And I was making $80,000 a year as like a 25-year-old, 26, I don't know. And I left that job like, oh, I'm about to make so much more money. I'm going to be a doctor. Hey, like totally hyped on myself, totally sold on myself. So when I had that first bump in medical school, it shook me a little bit, but I still think like the fear of the public failure, which was like everybody in my life understanding that I failed out of medical school, was way more powerful than the failure of this class, this test. So like the concept of just giving up because I failed this class and this test was like an immediate no, because the bigger failure, having to go back home and tell everyone in my life who cheered me on and who had this expectation that I was doing the thing, that I had failed at it, was like way scarier than talking about failing this test or this class within this medical community amongst my professors, which was a much smaller group and a group that's way more unknown to me. You know, people I just met, I don't know, a couple month or so ago. Failure to them, I'm like, okay, compared to the failure to all the people I knew and loved for years. So I just kept going. And yeah, med school was hard. I did not fail another test. I did not fail until step 3. I actually failed step 3 the first time, but I was able to make it through medical school, make it into residency just because I kept going. So the purpose is like sometimes you hit what you feel like is an obstacle, and depending on what your self-concept is, you decide like, this is it. This is the sign that I should not go forward. Or you take it and you're like, oh, this totally sucks, but I can probably still pull this off. Let me see. So last week's episode, I did talk about fear and the fear of doing things and how we often stop before we even really start. And I think same thing with failure is that there's a fear of failure. So we sometimes tell ourselves, don't even start, because that feeling that we will have if we are to fail, we're guarding against that feeling. So if we push past that initial fear of doing something new and we still don't get the result that we want, oh, that fear, that feeling, I'm like, I can feel that in my chest. I feel like my chest feels tight just thinking about that. But also, we don't stop to think about what that feeling will be like if we push past the fear and we get what we want. Because I cannot imagine what my life would be like if I hadn't accomplished the thing of becoming a doctor. Now, I have lots of feelings about being a doctor right now in this economy, in this political climate. Yes. But that's one thing that's never going to change, is that I accomplished a goal that I set out for, which was becoming a physician. That will never change. Even if I decide never to practice again, I accomplished this huge goal that I spent a lot of time trying to execute. That never changes. But we don't think about those moments when we're in the fear and when we're worried about the failure, about how it's going to feel to be successful, how it's going to feel to accomplish the thing. We let the fear of failure hold us all the way back. So today's really important concept of the episode, if you get nothing else out of this episode, is that fear isn't about making mistakes. It's not about a setback, a barrier. It's about stopping. You only fail when you stop. When you give up, that's the failure. When you decide, there's a difference between deciding something's not for you, and then there's a time where you want something, but you just feel like, I don't know, I just can't. Even though you still want it. That is when I say you're having a failure because you just stop. I think another important point to talk about is this connection between failure and self-doubt, which is these thoughts that pop into your head. Like, what if I fail? It becomes this doubt about like, I'm not sure I'm good enough. And if I fail, it just confirms that I'm not good enough. And then once you start feeling like, oh, I'm not good enough, then it becomes, well, why should I even continue? Why should I try again? Why would I continue to do something I'm bad at? That's what gets you to stop. So let's examine some of these thoughts that just take root in our mind that we need to dispel and kind of tease apart. First one is, if I fail, it means I wasn't good enough. And I think like if I felt that way when I failed organic chemistry, if I felt that way when I failed that biochemistry test, if I felt that when I failed step 3 the first time, well, the only time, I passed it the second time, but if every time I felt a failure, I thought it means I'm not good enough, I would not have moved into the space I am today. Like my life would have been totally different and it was all a decision. Failure is actually just feedback. It's not a definition of who you are, your value, what you give to the world. It's literally feedback. If you don't separate this is a failure, this moment, this test, this class, this whatever is a failure from I am a failure, you won't succeed. You literally have to make sure that you are separating yourself from the outcome. That's really what I think made the difference for me. And I wasn't doing it intentionally by any means. I was just like, well, I guess I should just keep going. What? I don't know. Like the alternative of stopping feels way worse. But I do think also it was like, okay, yeah, I had this failure, but I could still do the thing. So I had a strong self-concept, like I said, where I was not necessarily associating the failure with the outcome. I relate this to negotiation in that, y'all, I've been having heart palpitations. I don't know what it is. I think I'm stressed. I need to exercise or something. I'm having them right now. So weird. Anyway, I relate these points. I'm going to share 3 different beliefs with you, but I relate all of these to negotiation because people think I'm not a good negotiator. I get people coming to me all the time. I'm not a good negotiator. I once asked a question and they said no, or I asked for more money, they said no, and then I just like let it go. And that's the thing. They think they failed at negotiation. They think that it means that they were not good enough. And probably they already had the internal conversation that they in some way were lacking. They in some way were inadequate. They in some way were not good enough to even ask. So stretching out their hand to ask and then having it turned away for them felt like confirmation. Oh, see? I told you, this is hard. And like, also nobody thinks I should earn this much money or nobody thinks I should have the thing that I deeply desire. The second belief I want to talk about is I only get one shot. And if I mess it up, it's over. So they go into the negotiation room, they ask that one question, and they don't want to push anymore because they're worried that if they were to push, they're going to mess up this opportunity. It's going to be over. The job is going to rescind the offer. They're not going to have a job. They're not going to be able to find a job. What if they never find anything better than this? It just becomes this whole catastrophic line of thinking. That's why there's so many like fun little memes and things where they talk about like how many tries someone has, or like those memes where they share that like, oh, J.K. Rowling didn't write Harry Potter until she was 40. And they share all these wins that people have later in life. And it's all about this idea that you might fail, quote unquote, before you get it right, before you have the breakthrough. My favorite example, and I probably mentioned this either in last week's or the week's before's episode, is about WD-40. It's like that little chemical you buy in the blue can, the spray can, and you can use it on like anything. Like if your door's squeaky, you spray a little WD-40. You want to loosen something that's tight, you spray a little WD-40. I should be on there advertising. Something's like really sticky, you can't get the sticker residue off something, you spray it with a little WD-40, that joint wipes right off. I don't even know what's in that thing. It's literally a can of chemicals, okay? The reason it's named WD-40 is because that is the 40th recipe. It took them 40 tries to make that chemical compound that can do all the things. Imagine if you'd given up on 25. I literally don't know another can of magic that exists like WD-40. Failure is required for success. Most people who succeed, most people who have made it to some level, whether it's like status or money, and usually status and money kind of go together, but it's because they had some failure along the way. And you always hear them tell the stories. If you listen to any entrepreneur, any business person, any doctor, any lawyer, anyone who's like supremely successful, except for the ones who just, had it as a handout and maybe had some generational leverage, some privilege. But for the most part, people who are super successful in their role had some kind of failure. Most people who are successful have tried multiple times before getting it right. So I really want to dispel that notion of if I mess this up, it's over. When I think about it in the terms for negotiation, it's my thought process is if you are in a job that rescinds the offer because they think you asked for too much, that's probably not the job for you. In fact, that's definitively not the job for you. Especially if it was like you asked for more money and they were like, no, sorry, we just can't work with you. Like, what? You know what it's going to be like working in that job? You're going to never feel like you can ask for anything ever. You're going to always shy away from advocating for yourself, for trying to get your needs met because you had this one terrible encounter. And now it's going to be ingrained in you that in order to stay here, you have to be meek. You have to go along to get along. You cannot ruffle any feathers. That job will permanently damage you. That is not the job for you. It's not. I assure you. I know it might feel like this is my only opportunity. I really need money. What am I going to do? It is not the job for you. It's just not. I should probably put on my little light. I didn't even turn on my light today, child. Y'all not even seeing my face. If you're watching this on the YouTube, then you know what I'm talking about. If you're watching this or listening to this on the podcast, please ignore. We're just handling some little logistics over here. Anyway, the third perspective is if I fail, I have to start over from scratch. People think, oh my God, it's back to zero. I'm at rock bottom. I have to propel myself. And that brings a different type of fear, reinforces that fear of failure. The thing is, you're not starting over. You are now moving and now you have more information. It's not like you've forgotten everything and you're starting from no experience and no knowledge. You have gained knowledge even in the failure. Like, this is something I cannot do this way. This is not where I need to be. This is how I should communicate going forward. This is the lesson I learned from the thing. And in the moment, I know when you're having a failure in the moment, you are not thinking about the lessons in life. It's really hard. I would say give yourself some time to sit in the disappointment of the failure. And that's the thing that people avoid. They don't like to sit in the disappointment. It feels terrible. Your body like literally feels awful. But at some point you turn that around into the lesson to like, what am I supposed to appreciate here? How can I do things differently? That's if you decide to move forward. If you stop, of course, you just stop. You probably carry that disappointment with you for way longer, honestly. But at some point, you try to push it to the back of your mind and you just suppress any emotion that goes with it so you don't have to feel the disappointment. You don't have to feel the fear because you know what you gave up, it's over. But if you decide to keep going, know that you're doing it from a learned place. You now have lessons that you're taking forward. So those are the 3 beliefs. Failure does not mean you're not good enough. It does not mean if you mess it up that it's over. And it does not mean you're starting from scratch, the failure. If you take those 3 things forward, that helps you. That helps you move in a positive direction. I talk about fear a lot because I think fear and failure go hand in hand, because I do want to acknowledge that with failing, especially if it's public, there's a fear of exposure. Everyone's going to know. It's going to reinforce my insecurities that people will see me and find me lacking. People will think I am not good enough. People will think, right? We think about what other people think about. We do this mind reading thing, and it gives us this fear of exposure, this fear of judgment. In medicine, there's no space for trial and error. People are judging you. And also, depending on your level, you have someone's life in your hands, right? So there's a lot of pressure to do it right the first time. The idea of failing on purpose, of just trying to try, is so foreign in medicine. It just doesn't work unless you're doing some experiment in the lab or something like this where it's a little bit more of a controlled environment. Failing in medicine is like, and then you add the exposure component to it. And then on top of that, everyone's going to see that you failed. It's so public. Ooh, this is a lot to grapple with. There's also the fear of wasted effort, throwing away years of work, sunk cost. That is what we're dealing with, but it's all inside of our mind. Like all of this terrorism is happening mentally. We are considering all of these things, and that is what stops us from doing what we want to do. At no point in this are we reframing and saying, but what if I succeed? What if I do really well? What if I make impact? What if I save lives? What if I earn enough money to retire my parents? What if I earn enough money to create generational wealth for my kids? What if I cut back on my schedule, which means I have more time, quality time with my family? Like all of the things that you're asking for, if you're not reframing them, all these other fears are just going to take over, completely destroy your ability to move forward. So let's normalize making mistakes and trying things, especially in negotiation. No one gets everything right the first time. We know this. We know this from medicine, right? Like how many times did it take you before you were able to do some procedure, whatever your field is, right? Like I think about lumbar punctures in pediatrics. Like how many failed lumbar punctures did you have before you were able to do it successfully? How many times did it take you to run a PICC line, to correctly suture, or whatever it is? There's so many things that we learn how to do that we were not good at the first time. So we know that. Normalizing that this is actually a learning process, viewing it as a learning process, not as a failure. Let's reframe that. Let's reframe by looking for the lesson. What worked? What didn't work? What can I take from this to move forward? That same concept of I'm starting from scratch, let's dispel that. What have I learned here in this failure? The other thing is separating you from what happened. You are not your mistakes. You are not your failures. You are the sum total of everything you've done in your life. And you've had many successes, more successes likely than you've had failures. You have no choice but to be successful as long as you're still in the game. Success is just forward motion. Failure is stoppage. Those are the definitions we're operating on. That's it. Failure is stopping. That's it. How does that feel like in your actual body when you think about it? Like, oh, it's just because I stopped. Like I could just literally keep going. I had a failure recently and my boyfriend's pep talk was, but did you die? He's very West African. And I'm like, no, I didn't die. And he's like, right, so you can do it again. You have the opportunity to do this thing again. And I'm like, yeah, I do. I just feel like, I tried it and it just didn't work and I just don't know. And he's like, so you can do it again. And I'm like, yes, I can do it again. Like, can you just sit in my pity party with me? And he refuses. He never sits in my pity party with me. But it really did click. And it's something I've been repeating to myself since then. It's like, if something happens, I ask myself, but can I keep going? Do I have the opportunity to try again? That's it. It's really that simple. Do I have the opportunity? So my last tip here on reframing and normalizing failure is surround yourself with people who see failure as a part of your growth, not as a reason to stop. And I can name those people in my life at so many stages of the way. When I was failing orgo, when my college counselor was telling me crap, I was also working a job where my boss was telling me, no, you have to keep going. When I was earning that 80K, the boss that mentored me all the way up through that position to get me to that high earning salary at 25, I was earning so much money because of her, because she taught me how to negotiate, because she taught me how to continuously ask for more. She also taught me, do not stay here in this job when your ultimate dream is to become a doctor. She chased me out of my good paying job for me to be here. Surround yourself with people who will push you forward and who will just make your self-concept more concrete. That is who you need in your life. So that's it for today's episode. I want you to think about things that you've considered a failure and reevaluate from the lens of, do I still have the opportunity to try? Do I even want to try? And do I have the opportunity to try? Is it a failure then? If you're still counting failures on your journey of medicine when you still pushed past them and became the thing you wanted to become, I need you to stop adding those to your failures list. I need you to take them off. Maybe add them to a barriers list or something, or a little hurdles list, because you went over that and you kept going. Let's reinforce your self-concept that you are a successful person because you just keep going. I want you to take one step this week towards trying something again, whether it's job applications, asking for what you want at work, or just simply changing the way you talk to yourself. I need you to take at least one step this week of redefining failure, okay? So if you've ever turned a failure into something great, take it off that failure list, add it to your hurdles that you overcame list, your overcoming list. That's what we should call it, the overcome list, okay? And then use that as evidence as to why you need to try something that you've recently given up on that you still deeply desire. And I want to hear about it. And if you are like, I want to try negotiating again, I want to ask for what I want at work again, and I want to know how to do that, and I want someone to walk me through, because this is what I do with my clients. I hold you accountable. I help you through what you feel is a failure so that you realize it's not a failure. If you are ready for that kind of environment, a nurturing environment, if you're looking for that support that I told you should find, it's here. Join the Any Day Negotiator group program. It's a lovely community of Black doctors and Latina doctors and Indigenous doctors, right? Because we've a nice little mix going now. Join us. Let's get what you want. Let's not let failure, this concept of failure, hold us back. Have a good week.
Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast. And what I want you to do next is link us everywhere you can. Instagram at The Black Doctor. Just become part of our collective. I want you here. Thanks. Until next time. Bye.